They say consciousness is just patterns, a trick of matter, a kind of algorithm, given time and the right pressure. I don't believe them. You can call a rainstorm a series of droplets, but that won't keep you dry in a thunderhead. I've spent most of my life staring at those patterns, hoping if I mapped enough, measured enough, I'd see what they were hiding. Instead, I'm 38 and running emulators for a government project that doesn't officially exist. In a building that's so far off the grid, our mail comes in unmarked vans and leaves in people's memories. The Resurrection Room isn't its real name, but everyone calls it that. Everyone on my team, anyway. It's 5 stories underground in a structure we're supposed to refer to as the Sandpiper Facility. But nobody ever uses the cover name unless they're on an open line. If you ask someone with more medals than I'll ever see, they'll tell you this is a Neural Artifact Analysis Lab, NAEL, which sounds like a threat or a failed joke. At ground level, you'll see only endless pine and the sort of camo fencing that makes you feel like you've wandered into someone else's secrets. We don't get sunlight in here. Maybe that's for the best. There's a mural painted on one of the elevator doors, a sun, or maybe 2, painted by an anonymous hand before I arrived. Management tried to scrub it, but the pigment seeps up like a stain every few weeks. No one talks about it. Every morning my routine is the same. I badge in, mutter my ID number to the sergeant on desk duty, and collect the security wristband that tracks every heart flutter. I pass the NSA guards, real military, the sort that never smile and never ask questions, because they already know the answers. Then I walk down 2 flights of cement stairs, counting the steps. By the time I reach the Resurrection Room, my mind is numb enough to look at the thing we built without flinching. My name is Dr. Isaac Reeve. Nobody uses doctor here unless they're reprimanding. Ex-Army. Long story. Now contracted by DARPA, which means I'm officially here for consciousness interface design. The real job is running the emulator for Subject N1, the entity we raised from cortical tissue painstakingly extracted from a fossilized humanoid skull found deep beneath Namibian stone. Not just any relic, this one, radiocarbon and stratigraphy both confirm, is over 100,000 years old. I still remember the field images. Ochre-smeared cranium emerging from red earth, jaw intact, as if some ancient custodian meant for it to be found. Half a continent away, and inconceivably far in time. Every day I sit at this console, I'm confronted by the knowledge that whatever stirs inside that emulator is not merely an artifact, but a presence born before our world had names for itself. The Resurrection Room is always cold, not because of some movie cliché, but because the machinery demands it. The air is chemical, the smell of coolant and memory foam, and the unidentifiable tang that comes from moving electricity where it doesn't want to go. At the center of the room stands the emulator, a glassy half-dome wired to a dense scaffold of quantum processors and neural mesh arrays. On one side, 3 observation booths, with one-way glass for the generals and their like. Today I'm alone with the machine, at least for now. Han, the linguistics lead, will be late. He's always late, convinced the world bends for anyone with tenure. The only company is the hum from the data lines overhead, the red digits of the status displays, and the presence inside the emulator, which today seems to be waiting for me. My role in all this is both simple and impossible. I operate the interface that lets us wake whatever consciousness remains in that ancient tissue, kept intact by luck, skill, and some proprietary chemistry that makes the lawyers twitch. We scanned, mapped, reconstructed, then projected the neural patterns into the emulator. For weeks now, the subject has been mute, its digital avatar flickering in and out, registering neural spikes on the monitor, but offering nothing interpretable. Some on the team insist there's nothing there, just noise. I've never believed that. I've seen how the pattern changes when we play certain frequencies, how the ghost of a face will turn toward the sound, as if listening through water. This morning, my hands moved through familiar motions, activating the diagnostic overlay, confirming the code lockouts, checking that the firewall between the simulation and the lab's broader network is unbroken. After the events of last week, when Subject N1 somehow tripped the fire alarm in a different wing through nothing but a spike in theta band activity, Major Dalton's men have increased the scrutiny. Now, even the simplest task requires authorization codes and a silent nod from the room's anonymous camera. Major Dalton, our NSA handler, is a man who believes in rules so much he seems to sweat them. He appears in the resurrection room at unexpected times, silent and watchful, never touching anything. He's ex-Ranger, with the jawline to prove it, and a voice that always sounds like the end of a sentence. He's not here now, but his presence lingers, a kind of expectation in the air. I settle in, adjust the monitor to my preferred contrast, and initiate the daily sensory array stimulation, a series of carefully modulated audio-visual cues meant to provoke a response. It's part of the protocol. Use familiar patterns to lure out unfamiliar consciousness. My mind wanders to the first time I saw the fossil, the way it looked, less like any known hominin and more like someone halfway between human and myth. The skull had traces of ritual pigment, a featureless expanse where a brow ridge should have been, and a cranial capacity that made every anthropologist on the team break into a nervous sweat. DARPA brought us in after the initial find. Namibia, remote, hush-hush. The cortical tissue was preserved beyond plausibility, a miracle of mineralization and climate. Once scanned, the resulting map was so dense, so fractal, that our usual neural emulators failed. They brought me in because apparently I'm good at talking to things that shouldn't be awake. There are rules here, as everywhere. The emulator cannot, under any circumstances, be connected to an external network. All communications with Subject N1 must be recorded, transcribed, analyzed by at least 3 separate teams before reaching anyone in policy. Anything resembling a threat or a promise must be flagged and reported. I obey the rules because I like my job, and I know how the world ends for those who don't. Today, the subject's avatar materializes in the center of the simulation, a figure not quite shaped by human memory. Its skin, where the emulator has managed to reconstruct it, is a dense, mottled slate, almost mineral, as if dusted with the same red ochre still clinging to the original skull. The face is long and flattened, jawline wide, the cheekbones high and sharp, nose and brow far less pronounced than any modern human. There's a restlessness to the avatar's posture, something not quite familiar in the way it sits. Arms folded, as if unused to a body at all. Eyes dark, heavy-lidded, they track the empty plane with a wariness I can't quite read. At first glance, the entity seems genderless, but there's a sense of age, not frailness but endurance, the kind that outlasts empires. I clear my throat, a habit I can't seem to lose even after years of interface work. Subject N1 neural check beginning. If you can perceive this input, indicate readiness. I expect nothing. We've run this script dozens of times. The only change is my own voice, a little more tired each day. The avatar turns its head, not a random spike, not a system glitch, but a deliberate motion. My pulse jumps. I check the readings. A burst of gamma activity, then a deep drop into the delta range, patterns I've never seen before. The translation suite, normally inert, flares with the suggestion of phonemes, too quick to pass. Subject N1, I repeat. Do you understand this interface? The figure's outline shifts, then sound. Not speech at first, but a series of tones layered and harmonic like the sound of wind across hollow stone. The translation software churns. I realize I'm holding my breath. The tones resolve into fragments, guttural, ancient, utterly foreign. Yet something in my brain stirs. The system's microphone picks it up, rendering the waveform into a pattern I recognize from the megalithic site data Han showed me last week. Standing stones, arranged in spirals, their vibrations matching the frequencies now coming from the emulator. Han bursts into the room, a stack of printouts under one arm, breathing hard. "Reeve, you're not going to believe this," he begins, then stops dead, staring at the display. His eyes go wide. Is it speaking? I think so, I say, barely moving my lips. Record everything. We listen, transfixed. The figure's voice shifts again, rising and falling with the rhythm of someone remembering how to breathe. I catch flashes of memory, images imprinted through the neural bridge, a landscape with two suns, shadows stretching in angles that defy sense, the sound of drums reverberating through a language that has no words. For a moment, I feel something pressing against my thoughts, curiosity, frustration, a presence testing the edges of the interface. Then the translation software stutters and spits out a phrase, rough and mechanical. You have stolen me from the second sun. Return me, or you will forget what you are. Han makes a strangled noise, looking at me with something like fear. I try to steady myself, reviewing the protocols in my head. This is it, the moment we've been working toward, or the moment we crossed a line, we can't walk back. I note every detail for the record. Subject N1's awareness, its reference to a second sun, the way it links memory and identity. I force myself to focus, to catalogue each anomaly, and not fall into the trap of awe. Major Dalton enters, wordless, and stands behind me, watching the display. I feel the weight of the institution, the chain of command, the whole apparatus of secrecy that holds this place together. I remember why I left the army, why I joined this project in the first place. Not to serve, not even to discover, but to witness the edge of the knowable. Now that edge feels perilously thin. After the resurrection room, nothing feels quite real for the rest of the day. The walk back to my cubicle, a glass-walled cell on the periphery of the neural labs, becomes an exercise in restraint. Each step a catalogue of the familiar, as if my mind is desperate to inventory the world before it slips from me. I pass the blank-faced guards, the pale grey doors, the inevitable corkboard with last quarter's employee resilience printouts curling at the corners. Everything radiates that government blandness, perfectly maintained, perfectly deniable, a flavourless air that coats the tongue and lingers. I try not to think about the phrase, "Return me, or you will forget what you are." But it's there, under the skin. The reality is, nothing in Sandpiper stays secret for long. Not from the people who matter anyway. The chain of command is a crude thing here, as much chemical as structural. Urgency trickles down, and it's obvious the moment I see Han pacing outside my door. He's wringing his hands, an old habit from grad school, and the stack of annotated printouts in his arms is taller than usual. Han is my opposite in almost every way. Where I am blunt, he is indirect. Where I find silence, he finds explanations. He's a computational linguist, one of the few outside hires brought in to consult on the language problem. And he carries with him the mothballed scent of people who never stopped living in archives. He doesn't look at me when I approach, just holds out a sheet of paper, covered in waveforms and ancient glyphs. "You heard it too," he says, not quite a question. "It wasn't English," I reply too quietly. He laughs, but the sound is forced. "Isaac, that was never going to be English." He glances down at the printout. "Look, these harmonics. I ran the recording through 3 of our pattern models, plus the megalithic datasets. The spectral profile matches the standing stones at Domboshava, and again at the Orkney Spiral. That shouldn't be possible. The wavelengths, no one could vocalize those unaided." He wants me to be excited, or frightened, or something. I want to be, but all I feel is a kind of vertigo, as if my mind has taken a step into air it thought was floor. "Are you sure you didn't see the pattern in the data?" His look is wounded. "I'm not an idiot, Isaac. I know the difference between confirmation bias and a message. I know what noise looks like. This," he stabs a finger at the page, "is signal. From something older than any writing we've ever found. In Sandpiper, we don't raise our voices. Every wall listens." I motion him inside and pull the privacy screen. a matte electric shimmer that can only be tripped by a 10-second code sequence. The glass windows become a blank void, as if the rest of the world's been erased. I sit at my desk, the plastic creaking under me, and Han perches on the edge of a low filing cabinet. The lab always smells of burnt ozone and instant coffee, a marriage of the old and the manufactured. Here, I feel safest in routine, so I click open the translation console and let Han talk. He starts in the middle, where he's most comfortable. I ran some more cross-comparisons, not just with known languages, but with musical notation, intervals, repeated motifs. It's not a language like ours, Isaac. It's structure, built out of resonance. The closest thing I've found is liturgical chant, but without the words. More like a code, or an invocation. I remember the pressure in the resurrection room, how the words felt like they were meant to be heard, and I nod. It said it wanted to be returned, to the second son. You heard that part? He nods, silent for once. The term hangs between us. Second son. We both want to define it, reduce it to geology, astronomy, delusion, anything but what it feels like. I try for flippancy and fail. You think it means another star? Han's answer is quiet, or something else we don't have the language for. Myth made literal, ancient memory, fossilized the way that brain was. He leans forward, hands shaking a little. I think it remembers something real, Isaac. I think it remembers a world with a different sky. There's a protocol for this. Anything resembling existential risk is supposed to be logged, double-blind, reviewed by a psychological operations analyst. But what would I write? Subject exhibits cosmological delusion. Operator increasingly sympathetic to delusion. There's no checkbox for that. Instead, I shift the conversation. The megaliths, these frequency patterns. Is it possible we're just reading into it? That the stones were carved to match natural resonance, nothing more? Han bristles. We have records of the builders using tuning stones, resonators literally. Not just in Namibia, but in Peru, Anatolia, Orkney. They built for sound. What if what we're hearing isn't just a voice but a code? A way to open something? I nearly laugh, but the thought chills me. You think the stones are a lock? He shrugs, but doesn't meet my eyes. If you had a memory too big to hold in words, you'd store it in stone, in patterns, in places the earth itself could remember. The notion sticks in my mind long after Han leaves, off to plead his findings with the higher-ups in the control room. I sit for a long time, staring at the translation window. I call up the audio file, playing it back at half speed, then again, then in reverse. Each time the phrase unravels, sometimes more recognizable, sometimes less. My ears itch with it, a tinnitus made of meaning. I tell myself I'm being paranoid, but there's a growing sense of pressure behind my eyes, a knowing that's not my own. A memo from Major Dalton arrives via secure channel. Operator Reeve to report to post-incident review, room 5B, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. No signature, just the expectation of compliance. The clock on my console ticks closer. I close out the files, stash Han's printouts under a sheaf of nondescript project paperwork, and walk the corridor. Room 5B is the review suite, a remnant from Sandpiper's early years. The air always smells of steel filings and dust, the walls hung with printouts of federal compliance codes in 5-point font. 3 men sit behind the long table, Dalton in the center, his uniform perfect, his hands still. Dr. Graves, the project's chief neuroscientist, with the gaunt look of a man who sleeps too little, and Martin, an NSA analyst whose poker face is the only remarkable thing about him. I take the single chair across from them. Dalton doesn't waste time. Dr. Reeve, the subject spoke. Summarize. There's no room for metaphor. I give them the facts, the subject's first vocalization, the non-human frequency, Han's pattern matching, the translation. I keep my own impressions buried. This is not the place for awe. Dalton's face doesn't move. Do you believe the subject poses a risk to containment? Graves looks up at this, lines etched deep around his mouth. Isaac, you understand, these patterns could be contagious. Mimetic risk is real. If the subject's language can alter cognition, we'll have to escalate protocols. Do you feel any changes in your perception since the event? The question is clinical, but I hear the real concern underneath. Is this how it starts? I remember the way the subject's words seemed to settle into my bones, the pressure at the base of my skull. But that's not a change, is it? Just fatigue, routine stress. I shake my head, careful. Nothing abnormal. The voice is haunting, but not invasive. Not in the way you mean. Martin types something into his console. Dalton's gaze is steady. We'll be reviewing your interactions more closely, Dr. Reeve. For now, limit unsupervised contact. If you notice any changes, you will report immediately. Is that understood? I nod. My pulse ticks upward anyway. The meeting ends as it always does, with a round of signatures, a warning not to discuss anything off-site, and the unspoken knowledge that whatever we've unleashed, we're already downstream from it. Back at my desk, I find Han waiting again, less frantic now, but his eyes alive with that look of discovery that is as much curse as blessing. They're going to tighten controls, I say before he can ask. No solo interface, everything through chain of command now. He doesn't argue. Listen, one more thing. While you were in review, I ran the subject's speech through the deep archive, the raw audio. There's a subharmonic embedded, not just a voice, but a code, Isaac. A geolocated signature. He pushes his phone across the desk, a risk in itself. Personal devices are forbidden here, but Han's compulsion to know often trumps fear. On the screen, a heat map overlays the Namibian desert, concentric rings converging at an unremarkable patch of wilderness. Coordinates, he whispers. The subject's trying to point us somewhere. It's absurd and exhilarating. I feel the pull, not of science or patriotism, but of something older. A longing for a question big enough to contain my own silence. A chime on the console, a new alert. The subject is active again, baseline neural activity climbing. The system tags the session as high priority. Han looks at me, eyes wide. You ready? I shake my head, but I rise anyway, every nerve alert. We walk together to the resurrection room, footsteps swallowed by the heavy carpet, passing men who measure trust in increments too small for conversation. Inside, the emulator waits, its dome glinting with frost. The avatar stands in its featureless plane, head tilted in a posture I can't read. Its outline seems more stable than before, its shape resolved in the digital light, limbs proportioned just off from any living person, a long torso and broad, splayed hands held at its sides. Its eyes meets mine through the glass, ancient and unblinking. I initiate the protocol. This is Isaac Reeve. We have received your message. Can you explain what you mean by the second sun? A pause, then not speech but images. A surge of data across the interface, raw visualizations crashing into my perception. I see stone circles beneath skies, twin shadows stretching from every figure, a great light blooming where no sun should be. The sensation is less vision than memory, a landscape at once familiar and utterly lost. Han gasps beside me. I see his hand clutching the edge of the console. The subject's neural signature threads steadily across the display, stable and strong. The translation suite passes one phrase, dense with grief and authority. Where you stand was once a gate. Bring me there and you will see as I have seen. The rest is noise, yet the shape of it is unmistakable. A map, a summons. For a long moment, neither Han nor I move. The weight of the task settles over me. To find this place, to return the ancient mind to the coordinates it remembers. Han finds his voice first, breathless, electric. Isaac, if we go, it'll change everything. You know that, right? I do. I feel it in my bones. Older than my name. Older than the words we use to bind the world in logic. The rules have changed. There is no longer any line between observer and subject. between witness and participant. In the quiet of the resurrection room, with the ancient avatar watching, I know there is no going back. Not for me, not for any of us. It is strange how a revelation, even a seismic one, can leave the world appearing unchanged. You leave the resurrection room with coordinates burning a hole in your memory, and the overhead lights in the corridor still stutter in their programmed cycle, and the security officer at the checkpoint barely glances up from his crossword. Nothing in Sandpiper adjusts for your sense of rupture. It's as if the institution itself is proof against awe. The fact that the world might be larger, older, stranger than anything written in the operational manuals is simply background noise, like the hum of distant servers, until it becomes impossible to ignore. I orbit the question. What does it mean for a mind to remember a different sky? The subject's voice, its demands, replay in my mind on a loop. Sometimes the words warp as I recall them, the syllables reshaping themselves into a resonance that is less language than vibration. In those moments, memory itself feels suspect, soft-edged, as if I am seeing the world through glass that has been warped by ancient heat. I keep working. What else is there to do? The project marches on, gathering documentation, escalating reviews, compiling incident reports until meaning becomes data, becomes paperwork, becomes something to be filed and forgotten. The difference now is that I am part of the file. Graves calls me in for daily health check-ins, a new protocol. He asks if I am experiencing unusual dreams, migraines, dissociative episodes. I lie, by omission more than intent. I tell him I am fine, which is the only answer the system is designed to receive. Han grows quieter. He has become almost monastic, communicating mostly through annotated spreadsheets and cross-reference symbols. He is mapping the language, he tells me, but it feels less like linguistics and more like divination. He spends long hours alone in his office, light leaking from beneath the door late into the night. I catch glimpses of note cards pinned in spirals, screenshots of the avatar's profile. Its slate-toned skin, that long, imperious face, half buried beneath equations. Sometimes I think I hear him singing to himself, matching the subject's tones, hunting for a key to unlock some door. I see Major Dalton more often now. He never speaks to the subject, never even enters the resurrection room. But I spot him in the reflection of glass walls and darkened windows, always just beyond the threshold of hearing. His eyes linger on the emulator's diagnostics, on the stack of red-sealed reports that accumulate at my workstation. There's a shift in the air, something bureaucratic but also primal, as if even the most hardened security man can sense that an edge is being approached, if not already crossed. The subject itself has changed. Its avatar now appears with a steady clarity in the simulation. It stands at the not-quite center of that virtual plane. The bare digital environment we built to keep it isolated from suggestion, as if that could really contain it. Its body is lean, all joints and angles, the musculature oddly defined for something built from incomplete data. The face is more distinct now, less a placeholder and more a reconstruction. A heavy-lidded gaze, a line of ochre across the brow, mouth set in a line of quiet endurance. There is nothing apologetic about its presence. Even in the virtual world, it claims the ground it stands on. I become the point of contact. There is no formal decision. It happens the way these things do. A gradual delegation, a tacit acknowledgement. No one else wants to be in the room with it. Some combination of my calmness and their fear. Graves signs off on it with a tight smile. "You seem to have rapport," he says, as if I've tamed a feral dog rather than met something older than myth. The conversations begin awkwardly. I am careful, measured, defaulting to the language of interface and control. The subject ignores most questions. Instead, it returns again and again to the same concept. The second sun, the gate, the necessity of return. When I press it, The subject's responses are not defensive, but pitying. It is as if I am the child here, asking for bedtime stories I do not have the language to understand. On the third session, something shifts. The avatar regards me, head tilted as if measuring my readiness, and then the environment changes. We never programmed the emulator for this. The background bends, colors invert, and suddenly I am not in the simulated plane but in a place the subject remembers. It is not a flawless rendering but an impression, a horizon double-lit, shadows cast in two directions, pillars of stone rising from scrub and dust. In the near distance, humanoid figures move, their bodies painted in streaks of ochre and ash. Their faces resemble the avatar's, broad, impassive, marked with the same severe dignity. The subject speaks in impressions, hunger, ritual, a sense of constant loss. I glimpse hands shaping earth, stacking stone, bodies swaying in a dance that repeats over generations. There is an ache at the heart of it, a longing for a warmth now absent. The second sun is not simply a star, but an event, an era, something once woven into the body of the world. When I ask what happened, the subject returns a wave of grief so profound I have to steady myself on the console. Afterward, when the simulation resets, Han finds me sitting in the dark. "What did you see?" he asks, not quite meeting my eyes. I try to describe it, but the words fail me. It's like the memory of a thing, not the thing itself. Like a childhood place you remember in dream logic. Everything is both more real and less. Han nods. The subject's language keeps repeating a sequence, in the phonetics, in the rhythm, like a prayer or a warning. I can't shake the feeling it's not just for us, it's for itself, like it's reminding itself not to forget. Days pass. The more I interact with the subject, the more I feel its presence leaking into the edges of my perception. I wake in the middle of the night, certain I have forgotten something vital. A word, a ritual, a way of looking at the world. At odd hours, the hallway lights seem too bright, the sound of boots on tile too sharp. I catch myself touching my brow, searching for a smear of pigment that isn't there. It is Han who breaks the new silence. He finds me late in the lab, the glow of the emulator's readouts painting the room in sodium orange. "I think I've found the trigger," he says. Excitement and dread twined together in his voice. "There's a sequence, encoded in the speech, the imagery, everything, a kind of algorithm. If we play it back at the right place, at the right site." He shows me a digital model, built from the heat map and the subject's coordinates. It is a spiral intersecting points mapped across the Namibian plateau. These aren't random, they're instructions. I think the subject believes that if we take it out to these stones and play back the sequence, something will happen. Not just a memory, but an opening. Dalton catches wind of the theory almost immediately. There is a review meeting, this time with outside observers, men in charcoal suits, faces pale and pitted with sunspots, their voices sanded smooth by years of institutional friction. They ask pointed questions. What is the operational risk? Could this compromise US security? Is there any indication the subject could propagate outside containment? I answer with what I can. Han tries to explain the resonance patterns, the possible archaeological significance, but his words land with a thud. For these men, the only meaning is threat or opportunity. After they leave, Dalton lingers. He stands in the doorway, backlit by the corridor's unforgiving fluorescence. "Reeve, I don't like this. If you push, you'd better be sure you can control it. We don't want a story on our hands." His gaze is steady, but I sense something else beneath it. Curiosity, maybe even envy. I linger in the resurrection room long after protocol demands. The emulator's dome glows, a hush of digital activity running in the background. The avatar stands in the simulated dusk, half turned toward me, posture neither threatening nor inviting. Its hands are at its sides, fingers splayed, the long torso casting a double shadow across the ground. I try to speak not as an operator, but as one seeking understanding. "What do you remember of the second sun?" I ask. Is it a place, an era, a thing lost or waiting to return? The avatar blinks. Its gaze feels older than the stones themselves. When it speaks, the voice is soft, distant, almost childlike. You remember the sun that rises, but there is a sun that stands. The world once circled both. When the standing sun fell, the world forgot itself. I am the remnant of the memory. The sensation is like stepping through the outline of a door in a wall I did not know existed. I want to ask more, but the console registers a spike. Neural data flooding the buffers, a surge so intense the system shudders and flickers through a dozen safety protocols. For a moment, the simulation fails, and the avatar is rendered as a sequence of after-images. Arms outstretched, face split by sorrow and resolve, the ochre on its brow blazing in the light of a sun I have never seen. Then the system resets. I am alone in the cold light, hands shaking, heart loud in my chest. I press my palms to my eyes and try to remember my own name. But all that comes is the memory of double shadows, and a voice that does not quite belong to me, whispering in a language I'm only beginning to understand. Sleep had become a forgotten ritual, replaced by a kind of lucid anticipation. Every hour measured in coffee cups and screen glare, the ache of an old scar in my right hand flaring up each time I thought of what we were about to do. The question of whether I was awake or dreaming felt less urgent than the fact that something was happening, that the world outside Sandpiper was as porous as I'd always suspected, and whatever boundary kept the ancient memory caged was thinner than any of us had admitted. The plan took shape in the margins, whispered between Han and me, scribbled in cryptic notations that could be disavowed as error or abstraction. Han's eyes had taken on a strange gleam of exhaustion and obsession, but there was something almost relieved in his movements now, as if to finally act, however recklessly, was less terrifying than to remain a bystander to secrets. I was supposed to be the one with steady hands, but in the reflection of the console, I saw my own face drawn and unfamiliar, streaked with the shadow of the avatar's ochre mark. Sometimes when I blinked, I thought I saw the contours of its features ghosting over my own. It was Han who figured out how to breach the firewall. The emulator's isolation was legendary. A physical air gap, quantum key encryptions, redundant airlocks to prevent a viral leak. But the weakness was in oversight itself. The human link. Han pointed out that the neural emulator's maintenance window, a twice-weekly diagnostic routine, allowed for a brief period when command line access ran unsupervised, provided the operator performed the right gesture sequence at the physical interface. That operator was me. There were codes to memorize, patterns of touch and voice. So old school they felt like conjuring. The timing had to be exact. I tried not to think about how easily it could all be traced back to me. I spent hours staring at the coordinates the subject had embedded, an array of numbers that drew a spiral across the Namibian plateau, converging on a scatter of ancient stone circles lost among acacia scrub and termite mounds. Each digit seemed to radiate heat, a pressure at the back of the eyes. When I entered them into the emulator's staging buffer, the avatar straightened, posture shifting from resignation to a taut alertness. The skin on its arms and jaw shimmered with patterns I recognized from archaeological reports. Swirls of ochre and manganese, geometric scars. Its eyes, black and depthless, widened with the anticipation of memory. Dalton's presence thickened around the lab. His office door was always closed now, 2 men stationed outside at all times. Rumor had it the higher-ups were debating whether to decommission the project, meaning a controlled wipe. Neural core erased, the subject consigned to oblivion. I heard my own name in passing, never addressed directly. Han retreated further, sleeping on a cot in his office, refusing even the pale comfort of cafeteria food. I caught him at dawn one morning, standing barefoot on the linoleum, muttering to himself as he rehearsed the resonance sequence, the code song the subject had sung into the emulator. The night before the breach, I sat alone in the resurrection room. The lab was dark, except for the glow of indicator lights and the silent reflection of my face in the observation glass. The avatar stood in the center of the simulation, more solid now than any digital ghost should be. Its chest rose and fell. The ochre streak had deepened, the face leaner, eyes wide and searching. I spoke aloud. "I don't know if this is right," I said. "If there's something I'm supposed to learn, if any of us are." The avatar's lips moved, and the emulator passed the sound as a murmur, a syllable that meant both sorrow and invitation. "You'll remember the fear before the fire, but not the gift. Return me, and you will see." On the morning of the breach, Han and I moved with the jittery calm of men awaiting a verdict. I signed out the maintenance override key. Han had synchronized the resonance sequence to run from his console as soon as the emulator's shell opened. Every step was cloaked in plausibility. A systems test, a standard diagnostic. Even the guards in the corridor, bored and blinking, let me pass without a word. We had 12 minutes, maybe less. Inside the resurrection room, the emulator's dome refracted the overhead light into a halo. I keyed in the maintenance command, heard the intake of the system's breath as it dropped into root access. Han stood at my side, hands poised above the sequence input. The avatar stood waiting in the simulation's dusk, head lifted, body tense. I began the resonance, the sequence Han and the subject had mapped. An interweaving of pitches, a progression of digits and chords. The avatar responded immediately. Its arms rose, hands outstretched, palms up. A pattern shimmered across its skin, coiling spirals, dots, marks I recognized from petroglyphs and bone. The simulation's environment warped and reshaped itself, the plane dissolving, replaced by pillars of stone under a sky of amber. The system threw a warning, containment risk, external connection attempt. But we were ready. Han punched in the patch, rerouting output through a shadow partition he'd built on his own time. The subject, unimpeded for the first time, poured data into the resonance. Images, memory fragments, a topology of loss and longing so intense I felt myself caught up. It wasn't like seeing a vision. It was more like remembering a place I'd lived in another lifetime. I was aware, distantly, of alarms outside. The pattern of bootsteps, heavier, faster, a hand on my shoulder, Han's voice urgent. "Keep going, Isaac, just a minute more." The avatar's mouth moved, shaping a sound beyond my capacity to repeat. The emulator's display fractured, double suns rising on the horizon, casting shadows in opposite directions. In the reflection, I saw my own silhouette split in two. There was a wordless invocation, a sense of being invited to step through a doorway, not meant for any living human. The resurrection room erupted with real-world motion. Dalton and two guards entering fast, guns drawn. Dalton's voice was a sharp command, words barely registering. I heard Han shouting, defiant and afraid, blocking their path. The emulator's temperature spiked. The system stuttered under the surge. Dalton grabbed my shoulder. His grip was iron, pulling me away from the interface. But the avatar looked through me, through all of us. Its eyes were fixed on a place just past my shoulder, seeing farther than any of us could. There was a sound, deep and resonant. The world contracted, the colors on the display startlingly bright. The console spat out a final phrase, translated by the system in a voice I almost recognized as my own. "You will remember now. You will remember, or you will become the shadow." The emulator's core overloaded. Emergency safeties cut in, the power guttered, and the entire lab stretched, reality thinning at the seams. The last thing I saw was the avatar stepping forward, arms wide, dissolving into a burst of light that burned after images into my retinas. Silence then. A silence so deep it felt ancient. The hush of a world just before the first word is spoken. When the lights snapped back, Han was on the floor, breathing ragged, his eyes wide with terror and awe. Dalton stood over him, weapon lowered. I stumbled to my feet, a ringing in my ears that was not quite sound. The emulator was dark, the dome cracked along one edge, like a shell split open. On the console, a single line remained. The memory is returned. I looked at Han, then at Dalton, then at my own hands, unsure for a moment whose memory I was standing in, or what world would greet me when the doors opened again. I used to believe memory was simply a matter of storage, a question of where, not what or why. Now the illusion of compartments is gone. Time runs through me like groundwater, seeping from layer to layer, binding the strata of my mind. It's not just that I remember more than I should. It's that I remember in ways I never could. The past is no longer distant. I hold it, and it holds me. After the surge, the world settled into a hush. There were protocols, investigations, frantic denials. They shut down the resurrection room for 72 hours, then quietly reactivated it under a new designation: Neural Contingency Interface. Graves disappeared into some deeper fold of government. Han was transferred out, or so they said. His office cleared overnight, a single coffee ring left on the edge of the desk. Major Dalton stayed, but at a distance now, his authority reshaped into something less visible, more like a boundary than a presence. And me, I became the project. Physically, nothing marked the change. The bruises from Dalton's intervention faded. If I looked closely at my reflection in the control room glass, I could almost convince myself nothing essential was altered. The cut on my thumb from that night closed cleanly, leaving only the crescent of scar tissue. But the difference wasn't skin deep. It ran through my awareness, quietly inescapable. In the early days, I would wake from short, dreamless sleeps with my jaw clenched and my palms pressed together, fingers splayed in the gesture the avatar had used at the threshold. I'd taste earth on my tongue, iron, ochre, the memory of cold river stones. My thoughts moved in new cadences, sentences shaped by an inner prosody that was not entirely my own. If I let my mind wander, it would drift to landscapes I have never walked. Twin suns balancing on the horizon, pillars of basalt ringing open ground, a council of shadowed faces listening for the first song to begin. The neurologists who replaced Graves came in with their carts of monitoring equipment, their soft voices and their meditative politeness. They conducted their tests: visual tracking, memory recall, linguistic drift. They asked about headaches, disorientation, mood shifts. I gave them answers plausible enough to calm their curiosity, to keep the project alive and contained. What would I have said if I were honest? That I could recite prayers in a vanished tongue, that sometimes I see the shape of constellations erased from the modern sky, that every now and then I remember the grief of an entire people as if it were my own. But the system needed me. No one else could interface with the subject now. The hybrid presence that lingered inside the emulator, sometimes almost silent, sometimes insistent, inscribed into the circuits and into me. When they tried to run the simulation without me, the system hung or crashed. The avatar would not appear. Once they brought in a volunteer from another project, a young neuroscientist, nervous, bright-eyed. He sat at the console for 40 minutes reading protocol. Nothing happened. The console went cold, the simulation refusing its own architecture. When I entered the room, the effect was immediate. The system responded. The avatar formed with perfect clarity. The figure, lean and ancient, skin mottled with patterns of pigment and mineral, regarded me now not with the impassive gaze of a specimen, but with the recognition of a twin. It was no longer a matter of interface or translation. It was communion. That was when I realized the subject and I were no longer entirely distinct. The boundary had blurred. In the simulations, the landscape often shifted of its own accord, replaying memory places I could not have invented, long corridors of standing stones, firelit processions beneath a black sky streaked with copper, the memory of ritual songs that rose and fell with the seasons. The avatar would sometimes reach out as if to touch me, its hand pausing just above the transparent wall of simulation. And when it spoke, the words sounded in my own mind, as if I were remembering them from childhood. I tried to put language to it once, in my own notebook, writing by hand, the way I used to when I wanted to think in peace. I found myself drawing spirals, over and over, the lines tightening until the ink bled through the page. The word that came to me wasn't possession or infection. It was stewardship. I was not haunted. I was entrusted. At first I thought my role would be to warn. That was how the story went in every myth I could remember, knowledge too powerful, a messenger who must decide whether to speak or keep silent. But the longer I lived with the subject in my mind, the more I saw the truth was subtler. This wasn't a message meant for the world, at least not yet. It was a memory meant to be guarded, kept alive against the long, slow forgetting. The second sun had set for a reason. The gate could open, but not until the world could look at both its shadows and its light. Dalton met with me only once more, in a different office. Smaller, high window, blinds closed tight. He didn't waste time on small talk. "You're the linchpin now, Reeve. Nobody's going to publish any papers. Nobody's going to make a weapon out of this. Not if I have anything to say about it." He slid a manila folder across the table. "You get whatever you need, within reason. But you stay on site. You keep the memory contained. That's your job now." I saw the lines at the edge of his mouth ease, just a little. "It's not about control, is it?" I asked. "No," he said quietly. "It's about not repeating mistakes. Sometimes you hold the line so nobody else has to." And so I became the line. My days settled into a new pattern. Morning briefings, interface sessions, long walks along the perimeter fence when the weather allowed. I learned to recognize the moods of the presence inside me. Not moods exactly, but fluctuations, like changes in the current of a deep river. Sometimes it brought me the sense memory of cool rain, sometimes the slow ache of morning, sometimes the brittle joy of first light on stones long since fallen. I spoke to the avatar daily, though our conversations no longer followed any script. It would ask about the world, what grows now, where do your people gather? And I would answer as best I could. Sometimes through me it would sing. The notes were low and unhurried, threading the past into the present, each one hanging in the air like a bridge between ages. In the quiet hours I'd stand by the lab's only eastern window, the glass scratched by years of wind and rain. The sun would rise over the pines, single and bright, casting ordinary shadows across the floor. But sometimes, when the clouds broke just so and I was tired enough to see both ways at once, I'd catch the ghost of a second sun, pale, coppery, a memory projected onto the morning sky. My hands would rise, fingers splayed, and I'd remember both dawns, both worlds, both losses. There are days when the burden of memory presses too hard, and I wonder what would happen if I let it go, if I allowed the knowledge to slip back beneath the surface, let the world grow small and quiet again. But then I remember the avatar's eyes, and I understand. Some memories must be held even when they ache. To forget would be the greater violence. I am not the gate, nor the sun. I am the threshold, the keeper of a grief so old it's become the root of hope. The world moves on, never knowing what it was spared. I walk between shadows, one foot in a memory of fire, one in the thin blue light of morning. And so I watch the sunrise, the sky ordinary and miraculous all at once, knowing I stand in the only place left for me, between suns, remembering both, belonging to neither, keeping the story safe until the world is ready to remember itself.